Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're talking about the Jayden the Celebrated character review. Brand new unit added to Global as of this week. Pretty standard stuff here today. It's going to be the character overview, base and total stat analysis as we look at a lot of those metrics leading up to the report card, where give some grades to kind of contextualize how I value them, what you need to build for potentially, and knowing what his weaknesses are. Then some general thoughts, kind of pointing out some extra details as we then transition to the passives and counter abilities, the job abilities, the auto priority, really where you get to know the character more for the auto PvP perspective, the TMR review, and then some optimization pieces for the job-based vision cards, the Espers, the weapons, things of that nature. So kicking things off here, Jayden, the Celebrated, brand new Ice unit added to the game this week. He does have the unique main job of Stag Lancer with subjobs of Grimoire Keeper and Cleric. He does equip spears and has costed accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. And yes, he is a 97 faith unit because although he is a spear user, he does scale off magic attacks. So to maximize that damage, you will need to have him at 97 faith. Now, in terms of max range, he does have a max range of 5, but potentially 6, depending upon if you have a certain passive equipped. We'll see that in a couple slides. He only has 1 AoE on the main job and 3 single targets on the main job. His limit break is technically AoE as well, though. We look at the resistances here. 20% starting off to slash and 15% to pierce, 15% to missile. Those 3 alone are already pretty good, quite honestly. Those are some good double-digit ones to start off with, but the minus 10% to magic is definitely one to look out for, with minus 5% to strike as well. I do think that magic one is actually concerning because one of the big things for the game in terms of balance is when they release a lot of these magic units, they tend to skew stronger on the magic resistance or the spirit side of things because they have to be 97 faith. So just the way the damage works out, they tend to favor the extra magic resistance or spirit on some of these 97 faith units just to compensate for the fact that you have to have them at that higher level. Jayden is the exception to that, where they've given him no innate spirit and minus 10% magic res, so that is something to actually be genuinely concerned about. He doesn't have any kind of magic mitigation in his kit either. We'll talk about that shortly here, but in terms of ailments, also being cognizant of because he can be more easily afflicted by them, 50% to stop and doom. The stop is kind of nice, the doom is kind of whatever, the 10% to toad is fine, but really not all that impactful either. There probably could be some better ailment resistances here. I don't love these for him either, but for the master ability and the dream ability, the master ability, they really just give him some extra magic here at 20%, some 10 spirit pen innately at all times, and the dream ability, some good ones here for 15 AoE res, 15 accuracy, and obviously the normal 120 upgrade. Now we look at the base stats overall. HP wise, kind of in the middle here, not really good nor bad. He'll scale just fine, but I don't think it's a relative strength of sorts. When we look at the magic stat here, also kind of a step or two down from where you see most magic units in the game, but really not all that awful. That's part of the reason why they give him the 20% on the mastery abilities to kind of make up for that step back here. But obviously as you equip magic scaling things, he's just not going to get as much from your normal other units, but this is not an awful spot to be at. Agility wise, just a little bit below here on the average of 54, but we've seen before base agility doesn't really mean a whole ton. It's really more based on your passives in the board that end up making up for things. The dexterity, again, average to even just a step below average, and the luck does skew a little bit higher here than average, which is a good thing. It is part of his kit for crit evasion, as we'll see shortly here, but when we start looking at some of these other stats here, this is those 5 charts transformed into one where you kind of see those relative strengths and weaknesses. And again, there's no necessarily like glaring weaknesses per se. They're not great. They're relatively run-of-the-mill. And when you include the mastery ability, the board notes, things of that nature, they do a couple things to get his overall magic stat back up a little bit, and then some things to increase that agility. The dexterity and the luck does take a small step backwards, same with the HP, but overall the total stats certainly could be worse, but for a 100 cost unit, you would normally like to see them higher, and we'll see whether or not those stats are enough of a burden to compensate for how good, theoretically, his overall kit could be. So as we look at some of these other metrics here, the very interesting thing about this, so number one, he does start off at basically 75 base agility with these vision cards equipped, which is straight 2 points below the average. Not great, but he's got 2 agility passives, and one of them you'll likely have on all the time. So this second dot here at 81 agility is where you'll normally see him at, so that's not the worst spot to be at. He technically does have a second one, which jacks him up to about 87 agility, so he can get very fast hypothetically. I don't think that's going to be the case most of the time, though. We'll see why soon, but just continuing along for now, When we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, again, the dexterity being a little bit below average, he's got some crit nodes to bring that back up to the average. That's fine. The crit avoidance rate is about average too. That's fine. But there is something really important to consider here. When you consider equipping passives, if you look at the innate critical hit rate with passives compared to all characters, he does move up a little bit here because he does have a 15 crit hit rate improvement on one passive. So that's something noteworthy. You can get a little better on the crit hit, but he's still not on that gradient where I think I'd like to see him to be for more of those consistent critical hits. But on his main passive, very unique to him, is 20% crit avoidance rate, and when you do have that equipped, he will be heads and tails higher than nearly everyone else here for innate crit avoidance. So that is a big part of his survivability that is contextually important here. Now we look at the accuracy overall. Innate accuracy, not bad, just because he's got the 15 on the dream ability there, that 140 upgrade. So he starts off at a good spot, but no passives to increase that. So most other characters that do have passives will get a 20 to 25% advantage over him. So he's relatively average, speaking for accuracy, but he does have a guaranteed hit, which you could lean into. We'll see that in a couple slides. The evasion, he's at the very bottom gradient of what could potentially even be considered an evade unit. I don't think he's one personally. This is too low, and the game balance isn't meant to make ice really evade units. Neither are the spear units. But that's the last of the total stats as we transition to the report card here. Now, overall effective HP, despite that, average HP and the chart's kind of misleading you in that sense, the overall effective HP is really a B+ here. He's got 6 defense. Ninja edit here. You likely get up to 18 defense when you have the second passive equipped there. He's got an innate 15 AoE res and 10 all element res, which is similar to King Mont and Sephiroth. We've seen how good that can be quite often. So that's a really good thing for him for just effective HP starting out of the gate. The survivability, though, I'm going with an A-. He does get better here. His main buff, you'll hear me reference this a couple times, is exceptional. It's 25 unit res, 25 slash res, and although slash res is easily penetratable, that same buff when he attacks someone will reduce their penetration by 30% for 3 turns. So that slash res means something a little bit different here for Jayden than many other units, and he does have up to a 10,000 HP physical barrier. I'm sorry I got caught off here, but that's a 10,000k physical barrier. Again, barrier, we kind of take with a grain of salt because against some of the meta units like Sephiroth or like Bradley, they're easily broken, so that really means nothing, but 10,000 damage for people that don't have easy barrier break access is kind of exceptional. So that survivability definitely up for that reason. 50% debuff weakening for 3 turns on his second buff, which will reduce all imperils and all debuffs by 50%. So certainly nice for survivability there. And he technically does have a 25% HP heal back on his 120 ability, but it's only on critical hit. I don't think critical hits are really a strong point, so I don't know if that's a reliable way to heal back, but he does have above average resistances on his weapon as well, which we'll see at the end of the presentation here. There's 3 different kinds of elements for 10% resistance, so more than what you would get from a Truststone passive on a few meta elements. Now for the damage overall, I'm going with a B here. The thing that's tough about this, and this is tough for all Pierce units, you can only get up to 10% Pierce res pen from a Truststone passive. He does have 10 innate Spirit pen. You can get up to 50 with a passive once you equip it, 60 with another Truststone passive, and so that 60 penetration is good. But the lack of Pierce Res pen makes it very boomer bust for what you can predict for damage, because if a character is stacking Pierce Res, you're going to get a lot of your damage mitigated no matter what. His overall magic stat, though, should be okay. It's really just the Pierce Res that makes it kind of boomer bust, and you've probably seen that with Dialdo, those that have been using him. It's kind of unreliable to tell how much damage he can do, just because it depends entirely on the enemy Pierce Res. Now for agility, I'm going with a B+ here, and again, this is kind of weird, because he's got 2 different agility passives, and one of them you likely have on 100% of the time, so you can consider his agility basically 81 versus the UR average of 77. But he can get up to 87, which is exceptionally fast. I just don't think you're going to do that quite often, because that means you're giving up 40 spear penetration by doing that. We'll see that on the passive ability soon. So, overall, definitely above average and can get very fast, but got to be a little careful with how you think of that. The accuracy, I'm going with a C here. No accuracy passive. He does have the guaranteed hit on the Subjob, though, which is a good guaranteed hit. We'll see that in a couple slides here. The evasion, going with a C-. I don't think is an evade unit. The game balance isn't there. Ice has no luck cards. There isn't a Pierce evasion card. I just don't think it's there, so don't even entertain it. The movement, going with a D here, there is no move or jump alteration, so he's just kind of stuck at that move 3, jump 1, which not the end of the world, but certainly nice to have that extra flexibility. The auto ease of use here, I'm going with a B-. He's got a very smart buff rotation where he's not going to repeat his main buff. The AP management is really what's going to trip people up and making sure you can kind of manage that to maintain its damage uptime. And the hate reduction ability, it's the first time I've mentioned it here. He does have an ability that will reduce enemy hate to 0. That needs some extra analysis, quite honestly, for your casual player, because there's so much that happens in auto PvP related to movement, depending upon enemy hate, chaining, who your target priority is, that not all people are going to get the same value out of that hate reduction. Some people, it could totally just throw off what you're normally expecting to see, and you may not have optimal results because of it. Now, for the game disruption, going with a C, it's average. It's the same as any other, regular 100 cost unit. He is a great ice addition. He's a creative Pierce unit. Not good timing, obviously, given the economics of the game. Not a meta impactor either, although he can be good against Dark, hypothetically, just given that he's got that 10% res on his weapon. He's got the 10% all element res. If you go with Reagan, he's got a teammate buff that he can give Jayden for more Dark res. So there's something to be said there. Just not enough, though, and not enough people have invested in ice to really make that happen for him. Now, for the passive abilities, I'm going with a B here. He's got an A+ main passive. I really mean it. It's an exceptional main passive. He's got some handcuffing going on there for the secondary options, though. We'll see why soon, and I do think that drops him down quite a bit, because I think you're kind of stuck with those two, with not a lot of extra creativity in what you can do with your passives. The counter abilities, I'm going with a C here. They're just kind of straight average. They're not bad. They're just very average. The overall job and kit, though, I'm going with an A here. He's got loads of utility, a couple unique mechanics, the ice and pierce training potential. He's got a couple double hits in the kit, a couple good intangibles, and a very nice imperil on the limit break. Overall, the kit is really the shining star here to kind of make up for some of these statistical deficiencies, but overall, I'm going with a B- here. He does kind of semi-require Dark Shiva as an Esper and Vision card to really elevate him to where he should be. Not all characters require that same kind of Esper or Vision card investment to really meet their max potential, but I do think there's a harsh enough drop-off between the two there that you need to kind of discount that. It does also take a little extra thought to make him work, as we've talked about with the auto ease of use, and he is missing some key things here from weaknesses that we'll talk about in my general thoughts right now. So starting on some good things here, a disgustingly good main buff, as we'll see. 10k physical damage barrier, 25 unit and slash res AoE to himself and teammates, which is very, very strong for the current state of the game and where it's going, where a lot of these units have these like pick 2 mechanics, and it scales off the unit resistance to bypass how much AoE res people normally have. So this is very good for that. And for 3 turns, every time you hit an enemy, it'll reduce their slash res pen by 30, so you can build him for some good slash res and really get away with that, but that's only one attack type. It's still very good, but all the meta units are really slash oriented, so that's a good thing overall. Now, he does have a unique mechanic of hate reduction. When you hit someone, it will reduce their hate to 0, and yes, that includes initial starting hate. My problem with it, though, I think it's non-optimal range for usage, though. We'll talk about that in the abilities in just a couple slides. He does have great range flexibility, though. He's got a passive that can either change his arcing projectile pierce attack from either 5 squares away up to 6 squares away, so that is a kind of a nice thing, depending upon the map, depending upon your matchup, things of that nature. The superb extra survivability stats, though, are really good for post-3rd anniversary, with that 10% all element res and the 20 crit evade on that passive. That's definitely a really nice thing to see here. There's a lot of crit damage abundant in the game, particularly as you reincarnate units, get those higher crit rates that you're likely going up against in your Sephiroths and Bradleys, and this is a really nice way to kind of get an initial head start on that. Now, being in the Pierce category has a great, rainbow potential where they are getting more vision cards oriented toward them. Dialdo is theoretically a good rainbow tank and has some good overlap between Earth and Ice for him and Jayden. Overall, Pierce is a pretty smart option considering the character. He'd be a lot worse if he was some other weapon type, quite honestly. Of excellent utility, as I mentioned, he's got Re-Razor move on the low AP ability, main buff effects, as we just talked about. He's got a magic barrier break and the hate reduction mechanic on the same ability. He's got reduced counter chance of 100% on the guaranteed hit on his sub job. He does have curative potential on both Subjobs, which sounds great. Not as great as you think, though. We'll talk about why in a second. And the 38% Pierce apparel on the limit break certainly is nice as well, but there are some problems with that too that we'll talk about in these next few bullet points, talking about the weaknesses. So number one, obviously comes at a bad time for most people pulling, economically speaking. Even with the increased drop rate, Visior's is kind of more smartly spent right now for other more impactful units. The lack of cast time reduction, though, is a really big demerit for me that really makes some of the upside of the Subjobs much less attractive, and specifically speaking, that curative potential, where if you are at the full 1,000 cast time to heal a teammate, that really doesn't mean anything in the middle of the team fight. So it sounds good on paper, it's not good in practice. And the lack of spear penetration on the main kit abilities is also concerning because you have to have that second passive ability on. If you don't have that on and you leave him to just 20 spear pen with a Truststone passive, that's not nearly good enough, in my opinion, to keep up with the magic or to damage dealers in the game. The AP issues are a real concern without external help, where you talk about the Dark Golem Vision card for the increased acquired AP, Trust Stones if you go a different kind of Trust Stone set for some of those bonuses, the Silver Spectacles, which have some initial AP. Technically, Velas does work really well, though, considering Velas's heal ability is also an AP restore, so there is some good synergy there, but you don't want to be locked into just pairing with one character either. Overall, the AP concerns are a legit thing because he only starts at 18%, which is similar to all the physical damage dealers in the game. Now, let's talk about the passive abilities. Glimpse of Greatness is a great passive. Magic 24%, Agility 12%, All Element Res of 10, Crit Evade 20. That is an S tier passive ability to start out with. Again, as I've talked about, the problem is you need to have 40 Spirit Pen for like the bare minimum in this game, which locks you into clandestine reading, and you miss out on some of these other great passives where Lessons from the Purple Dragon increases that crit rate, which you theoretically could want. It also increases the range on some of those abilities, which you won't have access to now. Cleric Intuition is a very good one for that extra 12% agility, obviously the Spirit as well, but I don't think at the trade-off of losing out on that Spirit Pen, so really, really good here, just not as good as it could be. And then the counter abilities I talked about being average, I really think these bottom two are better than the unique one that they gave him. This one is just a regular old 30% to proc, 121 typeless piercing attack. It's whatever. This is whatever. But the hidden resistance certainly can be nice for the reduction of hate and the AoE res of 40 for one turn. The auto cure certainly is nice too, just to potentially take an extra hit from an enemy. And as we get to the main job buffs here, so again, I've already talked about this at length, excellent main buff. Even the second one here is really good. 40% magic, 50% debuff weakening for 3 turns, so all those debuffs get cut in half percentage-wise, and a very important 15 AP. Obviously, the risk with this second kind of buff is that the team fight might already be happening depending upon the map space at that point, so this one may not be as reliable to get off, and obviously omits the use of a TMR when you're talking about priorities. So this one's really good, just needs to be, taken down a peg considering how often we see these second buffs not get used in a fight. Now for the main job offensive abilities, a couple things here. Number one, all 4 of them are Pierce Ice type attacks. 2 of them do require direct line of sight, and 2 of them are arcing projectiles, which I do think theoretically increase with range addition. So if you have someone who can increase range, like a gunner unit or a TMR, these should go farther by a square on their own, and they do get further based upon your height. So there is some really cool mechanics here with a couple of these abilities, but let's talk about the range overall as well. You're talking about 3 unit scaling attacks and 1 AoE ability. Lifebane Lance here at the top is that Dispel Re-Raise, a very, very nice late fight ability to potentially have to use. Magilance Rain is the one he'll likely use most often, if only because this is the potential range of 5 squares away, so it is his furthest range. So just speaking statistically, it's likely to happen more often than not, particularly when you consider that if 2 enemies are together, that's the priority from a damage perspective. This is a very valuable decreased healing power of 50, though. We've seen this everywhere now with tanks, so this is a very good one. It's also a double hit here, so this is a good ability. The Dispelling Descent is the one that's incorrectly written on Motive Calc. The way this mechanic works is when you hit someone, regardless of how or where they get their hate from, even if it's negative, it'll bring it to 0. It's obviously great from the perspective that it's a magic barrier break, it's another double hit. The one problem I have with this, and I gave a hint at this in the general thoughts, this is only 4 squares away, as opposed to Magilance Rain, which is 5 squares away. I wish that was reversed, because when you talk about dispelling the hate on a tank and bringing them to 0, I want that to be the first earliest ability that this character can use. Because by the time their next turn comes around and they dispel the hate, well, if the tank has only 5 hate, that means it's basically 3 hits till it's gone. By the time Jayden gets a second turn and he's close enough to hit, that 5 hate might already be gone, number one. Number two, by that point, your team has already basically moved in the direction that the hate has forced them to, which is where I think this is probably the greatest value comes from. It's in manipulating where your team moves. The fact that this does have a lowered range, and if you're going against someone who's a tank who's like next to a teammate, statistically speaking, Jayden's going to opt for this AoE ability instead, so you may not even get access to this. So this is very good on paper. In practice, I just don't think it's the same glitz and glam that we're kind of making it out to be. But overall, still a very solid ability. And finally, Impaling Wave. This is only 3 squares away. It's the highest mod in the kit. It will restore HP if you hit a critical hit, but again, that's kind of debatable given his crit hit rates. And AP-wise, again, kind of expensive here. 34 AP, 26 and 27 AP, so there's some things to consider there. Now for the limit break here, this is kind of similar to Vega, if you guys remember. This shape of limit break makes it so that it's very, very close range. It's 58 AP, so by the time he gets close enough, he very likely will not have enough AP to use this ability. So no matter how good it is in practice, this is a very difficult one to get off. I really like it. I don't love it. And just based off my testing with Vega's limit break and how difficult it was for him to use that one, I don't have high hopes for this one. Now we look at the vision card potential access. This is similar to Dialdo. These are both attack scaling vision cards, and they scale off attack stats, not magic stats. So these are not meant for damage. This is really more for utility, maybe some PvE things in terms of chaining potential, but it's still worth an honorable mention. He can technically use both these abilities. Now for the Subjobs, this one I don't hate. It's not amazing. I'm probably not using it first and foremost. Blessed Discord is a non-damaging type of ability, so they'll still be used against evade units, or if he's out of AP and can't regular attack someone, which is possible because this is 4 squares away, so it's technically further than the range of like walking and hitting someone. I do like that there's 2 status effects on here for a 97 faith unit. Not the worst TP ability in the world. The Golden Sun Lance though, this one maybe kind of looks and sounds great just based upon how large the AoE is and 220% mod, but again, cast time 220. He's got no cast time reduction, 36 AP. This is a really tough one to appreciate. So overall, kind of a miss on this sub job. I do think the Grimoire Keeper is probably the best one though, just from the unhappy ending perspective that you have that 100% hit chance. It's also the reduced counter chance of 100. You theoretically have Archaic Healing here, but there is a cast time associated with it. Again, I don't have high hopes for that. Attritional Protection is a really good buff. I don't think it's better than the main 2 job buffs though. So overall, this one's fine. Probably my favorite, but I don't think it's going to make or break his character. And then finally, the Cleric. This one overlaps with Howlet. And the problem with this one is the same as Grimoire Keeper. There's no cast time reduction. So in terms of using Curative Prayer or Lighter Dark Veil or Esunaga, kind of some weird mechanics going on there. This one's okay. I don't love it though. Probably a little more unreliable than you'd like it to be. Now as we get into the TMR review, honestly, I think the best thing about this one is simply just the stats on it, where you get another accessory that's got 5 agility or potential 12 crit evade if you're going for some of that build, which there is an argument to be made for crit evade nowadays. Whole different presentation though. The ability itself is fine. Yes, 60% is the highest buff you can get on a TMR. And yes, the diamond range is very good. Everyone knows at this point how much I love those, but this strikes me as more of like a PvE TMR than an actual like auto or even just a PvP TMR. It's fine. The stats are really the big upside for it though, in my opinion. Now the job-based vision cards, this is where I do think Pierce is slowly getting the breadcrumb trail to a good spot. Now, number one, we know that Believers in the Bronze of Brotherhood is an excellent vision card here. Focusing more on the party abilities, and I have them in the boxes here, these 3 vision cards, Nightmare Before Halloween as well, and the future Alaya vision card, hit your unit res, your AoE res, or your agility. And you have a couple different options on how you want to flex these into your party. So yes, Pierce is in a really good spot for either mono Pierce teams or throwing them in rainbow teams that overlap with these very well. You do have a couple others here. Sun-Speckled Encounters, a little more niche for the resistances overall. Excitement of the Eve, really not great for Jayden outside of the crit rate, which you talked about, which she's not good at. So I still don't think this is a main slot vision card anyway, though. So low expectations on that. And Swan-like Grace, again, very, very niche considering its attack and crit damage, which is not his strength. And the Missile Res is fine, but I'm typically not using a sub-vision card just for that, but you might. Regardless, you have at least 3 really good building blocks here, so I do like the down the road potential for what Jayden has when you talk about job based vision cards, outside of just mono ice element vision cards, which we've seen are very good on their own. Now for the Esper Synergies, again, I talked about this in the report card here. Dark Shiva is by far and away the greatest Esper you can put on him, bar none. It's not even remotely close. There's initial AP on it. There's that 5% increase of magic damage on it no matter what, which is great for getting around that pierce resistance potentially. A lot of other really smart nodes, and so obviously those that are pulling for her, great. Jayden's going to love you. But the rest of them, it's pretty standard. I think Bahamut and Dark Ermu are two of the best for the human killer and the agility and what they bring. I do think secondarily here, Freezes and Shiva, regular Shiva, are good ones. Again, just for the ice attack, you get some accuracy on Shiva. You get some much needed spirit that Jayden has none of on the Freezes board, so that's definitely kind of nice. And then I do think that Typhon is interesting too, because there are that magic percent up, you get accuracy. There's a couple things to like there. But overall, your Esper Synergy is pretty straightforward, I think, in my opinion. But the real complexity of him is the weapon optimization. Now, I do think his Horn of Glory is the best weapon for him. Obviously, it's got the nice magic stats on here. I do theoretically like the crit rate build if you need to amplify that stat a little bit. The effects, though, are really the best thing about this, where you get wind, light, and dark res of 10% on ice units, not just Jayden. And obviously, not only are these above what you can get for Truststone passives, but it frees up your slots for Truststone passives, where if you wanted to add some ailment resistances, some weapon type resistances, you can get a little more creative there. And the Pierce Attack 15 certainly is nice. So I do think this is the best. Just as a quick comparison, because some of you might have been thinking more recently back to Dialdo's weapon, this one is nice that it's got the magic stats, but outside of that, unfortunately, Jayden is not part of these conditions at the bottom, so he does not get that AoE res or the human killer, unfortunately. It's just the Pierce Attack 10. The magic attack 10 is kind of nice for the Subjob theoretically too, but this weapon definitely inferior in my opinion to Horn of Glory. But there are a couple other options if you want to get creative. The new spear that just dropped today, we do need to research this top ability a little bit. My current interpretation of it is when you're below 60%, any attack you do will have a 10% AoE imperil on it. We know he's got a main ability that has that great AoE shape on it. I do like this for the extra accuracy it gives as well. This is a big thumbs up. I do think it's just a different kind of spear, but I don't know if it's preferable to the main one we just talked about with all those extra element resistances. 2 honorable mentions though. The Platinum Lance. Now, although this is a physical attack oriented one, these stats here don't mean as much with Trust Stones in the fray, because typically Trust Stones basically have the same attacker magic as the weapon anyway, so it's not a massive fall off. But the thing I really like about this, obviously the reaction block rate of 30, where he's got none in his kit innately of reaction block rate. You do also get 20 initial AP. That's the most important thing about this, while still retaining the Pierce attack modifier of 15. So I don't think this is the worst option for initial AP. Just an honorable mention. And then finally, the Ice Lance, again, honorable mention, if only because I like the intangibles on this of the extra accuracy or crit rate on the +6. These are notable numbers. And then theoretically the free 10 accuracy on the board, as well as the highest mods here of 45 for the ice attack and pierce attack, which is basically everything on his main job, right? So overall, this one's okay too, but not my favorite. But you do have some flexible options to choose from, more so than your average unit, I would say. But that's the Jayden the Celebrated character review in a nutshell. Again, there's a lot to really like. There's also a lot to say, I like this, but I like this, but I like that, but just at the end of the day, that's not really a good spot for a character to be in, particularly for a 100 cost unit when you talk about what it takes to pull them. But overall, those of you that do pull him, I'm sure you're going to get some good usage out of him. I'm definitely going to be looking forward to pulling him in the regular pool and whenever I get that opportunity comes. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all soon.